And now it is an honor to introduce an outstanding American leader, a woman who has served this country with great distinction. She was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Gerald Ford administration, and may I add, she was the first woman to hold that position, so I think we should all thank her for opening the door for so many women in government from then. And she was also the U.S. Trade Representative for President George H.W. Bush. In that critical role, she was the primary negotiator of the North American Free Trade Agreement, for which she was presented La Orden Mexicana del Águila Azteca, the highest honor awarded to a non-citizen by the Mexican government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chair and CEO of Hills & Company and co-chair of the Inter-American Dialogue, Ambassador Carla Hills.
Thank you, Maria Elena. I also want to thank every single person in this room. You are indispensable to what the Inter-American Dialogue is able to accomplish, and it accomplishes a whole lot. We've been privileged to bring to the podium tonight a series of remarkable leaders, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce one more. Roberta Jacobson has earned resounding applause for her outstanding public service at the Department of State, and her command of the culture, language, and history of this region is truly exceptional, and her experience is deep. For 25 years, she has focused on the critical issues affecting our region. For the 5 years that preceded her current role as Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, she served as Acting Assistant Secretary, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, and as Senior Coordinator for the Citizens Security Initiatives. And earlier, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Canada, Mexico, and NAFTA issues, and as Director of the Office of Mexican Affairs. She's been in charge of coordinating security initiatives that are extraordinarily important to North America's challenges. And she's also served as Deputy Chief of Mission to the U.S. Embassy in Peru and as coordinator of Cuban affairs. After graduating from Brown University, and before obtaining her master's degree in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School, she worked at the United Nations for the Social Development and Humanitarian Affairs Center. And when President Obama announced his intention to reestablish relations with Cuba, he wisely turned to Assistant Secretary Jacobson to lead a U.S. delegation to Cuba to begin that process. And in June, he nominated her to be our ambassador to Mexico. It would be hard to find an individual with greater knowledge who has demonstrated more wisdom with respect to the issues involving our region. So it gives me enormous pleasure to present a great friend and a true leader, Assistant Secretary Roberta Jacobson.
Well, thank you to Carla for that introduction, and to Michael and my colleagues at the Dialogue for including me in this event. Carla Hills has been an inspiration to women like me, someone whose toughness and competence has never been questioned, and I would note, never been called strident, nor whose commitment to this region has ever flagged. And I'm very honored to be here tonight with some renowned figures who are incredibly important contributors to the progress that we've seen in this hemisphere over the last few decades. As someone who's made her career working on the Americas, caught up in the daily grind and the bureaucratic details, I know that it takes an effort to step back and see where we're really making progress. But as I hope to come to an end of my 4.5-year tenure as Assistant Secretary, it seems to me that we have reason both to be proud of many accomplishments and to gird ourselves for serious challenges yet to come. Let me start with some of the accomplishments of which I think we can be proud. At the Summit of the Americas in Panama last spring, President Obama noted the commitment that he made in 2009 to begin a new era of cooperation with the Hemisphere as equal partners, with relations based on mutual respect. And I hope that our partners would agree that we have honored that commitment and are looking to the future. With this in mind, we reestablished diplomatic relations with Cuba. This is forward-looking policy. It improves our ability to support the Cuban people, emphasizing people-to-people relations and increased ties with trade with entrepreneurs, communication, and dialogue. Our goal remains unchanged: to empower the Cuban people and support the emergence of a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic Cuba. This means that human rights remains at the core of our Cuba policy, and we will continue to support those seeking their universal rights. But it is a new day, and we look forward to our partners in the Hemisphere working with us more closely than they have in the past on these issues. I'm not going to spend time on breakthroughs in the Colombian peace process because my boss and mentor, Bernie Aronson, has so ably done that. And let me tell you, he is still my boss. And he always will be. But peace in the longest-running civil conflict in the Hemisphere will surely have significant positive effects throughout the region. In Central America, we developed a more comprehensive approach to the challenges of crime, poverty, and corruption, one that builds on the past citizen security programs but incorporates a new focus on economic development and good governance. Recognizing our shared responsibility, we have updated our drug control strategy to a more balanced approach that increases our focus on prevention and demand reduction. We are redoubling our efforts to create an inclusive economic policy because macroeconomic numbers, even when strong, often obscure millions left out of such progress, which means that we need to invest more in quality education and infrastructure. We're building on the U.S. record of leadership on free trade with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and my job has been consistently to raise my arms and remind people that 5 of the countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership are in this hemisphere. It will lower barriers to trade with key markets around the Pacific Rim, but go beyond, bolstering protection for intellectual property, labor, and the environment. And we're working with key countries in the Americas to ensure that just days from today, COP21 in Paris results in the most far-reaching climate agreement ever signed. Which brings me to what I see as the most important lesson I've learned in this job and our greatest challenge. Nearly all of the threats and many of our successes can be traced back to the health of our government institutions, what we commonly call the rule of law. The rule of law and with it sound government institutions are the greatest bulwark against extremism, transnational crime, and corruption that corrodes institutions from within. Even as protesters criticize their governments, I see progress in these social protests, peaceful, democratic, and legitimate, taking place across the hemisphere. And it doesn't stop at the Rio Grande. I've actually heard that there's some of that same anti-politician sentiment here as well. These protests are aimed at ending actions that hurt the very people government officials are supposed to help. President Obama pointed out that corruption isn't just immoral. It siphons off billions of dollars that could feed children, build schools, and fund infrastructure. It stifles economic growth and promotes economic inequality. It aids and abets human rights abuses and fuels organized crime. And the effort to fight corruption involves the creation of internal and external watchdogs that hold institutions accountable. One important global mechanism is the Open Government Partnership, now 4 years old and 69 countries strong. The commitments of the OGP are real and meaningful, and there is a robust civil society participation. So why are only 17 countries in this hemisphere members? The Open Government Partnership supports efforts we have seen in many countries to respond to threats by debating tough issues and working openly to find solutions. But threats to freedom of expression and association, whether from state interference, criminal violence, or institutions that can't or won't enforce the rule of law, stand in the way of this ability to respond. For too long, we've been complacent in our defense of democracies without examining the strength of the institutions that underlie them. What is certain is that if we fail to heed this frustration and anger, fail to take advantage of the opportunity of this moment, we may convince our citizens that democracy can't deliver. In this crucial moment, we can defend and advance the democratic transformations begun more than 30 years ago. So in closing, I think that we have to frame the most important challenge in the Americas in a very simple question. Will we respond to the opportunity put before us by citizens who are, in the infamous words of Howard Beale from the movie Network, mad as hell and not going to take it anymore, or will we return to business as usual? It's an important moment for the hemisphere, one in which we need to prove that democratic institutions can deliver, and that's why I'm so pleased to be here tonight celebrating with those who work so hard to answer that first question, yes we can, si se puede. Thank you very much.